This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, the budget stalemate continues in Raleigh as lawmakers and the governor tussle over Medicaid expansion. Charlotte continues to push for a Major League Soccer team. Don't have one yet, but we will be hosting major soccer events over the next 5 years. A shooting at a Steak and Shake raises the homicide toll again, even as other violent crimes continue to rise. Chief Putney speaking out, and the DA will speak to City Council. And candidate filings continue as Mayor Vi announces her bid for re-election. Our roundtable of reporters is set to detail those and other stories, and those reporters are Steve Harrison from WFAE News. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Nick Oxner is here from WBTV News. Hi.
Long time no see. Hello.
Yeah, it's been a while. Katie Peralta reports on business and other topics for the Charlotte Observer. Good morning to you.
Morning.
And Eric Spanberg is the managing editor. We're trying to figure out what that is at the Charlotte.
So are
Business,
they. So are they.
at the Charlotte Business Journal. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
We're all on the radio. We're also on Facebook Live. We're just a few weeks into the fiscal year already, but still, North Carolina is without a budget. The governor vetoed it. The legislature doesn't seem to have the votes to override that veto, and compromise seems in short supply this morning. That's at least until Tuesday it did. And that is when Governor Roy Cooper announced a proposal.
It's responsible. It offers give and take. Republican leaders should consider it closely as we continue to negotiate.
And here it is Friday, so nothing yet. And you said just before we went on the air, and I'm not sure I should quote you on this, Nick, but you said that you think that the governor is being a little less responsible than the legislature.
Oh, just barely.
Just barely.
Just barely.
It's a close race.
Yeah, so in Raleigh, everyone's to blame almost all the time in these situations, especially over the last few years. First of all, let's put the budget negotiation history, recent history, in a little bit of perspective. It's not that unusual that North Carolina doesn't have a budget as they enter into the new fiscal year. When I got back to the state in 2015, I think it was September until they got a budget, and that was with supermajorities of Republicans in the House and Senate and a Republican governor, and they couldn't agree. And so really, this isn't all that unusual to be in the position where we are. That being said, to go back to the piece of sound that you just played from Governor Cooper offering his compromise, it is interesting that this compromise comes about 2 or 3 weeks after you can't see me, but negotiations in air quotes. Watch the Facebook Live.
Well, isn't that what either Phil Berger or Tim Moore said, that this compromise could have come weeks ago?
Well, I mean, they started negotiations weeks ago. The Republican criticism from Senate Republican leader Phil Berger and House Speaker Tim Moore, both Republicans, said, look, we showed up to your negotiations and you didn't have a proposal. Now, some of that, I think, was also a little grandstanding and a little bit for show. But the governor's office hadn't put out a serious detailed counter to the Republican budget until Tuesday.
But isn't that part of the game? If you're fairly confident that you have an unoverridable veto, you wait till everything's laid on the table, and then you say, okay, here's what I'll do.
It is definitely part of the game. We're all watching a big game, and that could be why we're still here without a budget.
So what was the governor proposing in this proposal that he met with GOP legislators on?
Well, a couple of things he had were larger raises for teachers and for state workers. He also had a cost of living increase for retired state employees, which I don't think the Republicans had. Is that right, Nick? Was there a cost of living for retirees in the Republican side?
Yes, 0.5.
Okay, it was larger. So yeah, so basically his compromise, I guess, was coming down from his higher numbers to less higher numbers. Would that be a fair way to put it?
No, I don't know that anyone had included a cost of living increase for retirees until the final.
Until that, okay.
Yeah.
And he's also he wants to restore a master's degree pay increase for teachers. So what has been the GOP reaction to these proposals?
I don't think this is going anywhere, right?
No,
this has been pretty
I don't
chilly.
think there's largely been one. Why haven't we negotiated this week? Because Phil Berger's out of the country in Germany at a pre-planned conference, which is something that Democrats have seized to say, really, you're leaving the country right now? And remember, this comes after Republicans criticized Roy Cooper for being out of state in New York during the early round of negotiations. Remember, we called this a game.
Yeah.
Sure. Speaking of games, we also had the Medicaid compromise compromise. It wasn't really a compromise.
Well, that's the sticky wicket, isn't it, in all of this
Yes.
Medicaid
Yes.
expansion?
And look, the governor has been clear since January that he will not sign a budget that does not include Medicaid expansion. Now, that's a real problem because Republicans in the Senate aren't going to pass anything that looks like Medicaid expansion. Now, it's interesting, though, because the House Republican Conference would pass something called Carolina Cares, which is what Republicans who would be in favor of Medicaid expansion would call Medicaid expansion, roughly. I'm sure there are finer differences, but it's the closest thing Republicans would get to passing Medicaid expansion.
Well, the official title of Carolina Cares, I believe, is North Carolina Health Care for Working Families. And that's the...
Yes, we've got some messaging going on here. And this fight really has not changed, although you do have that slight movement on the House side among the Republicans. But as Nick said, the governor ran on Medicaid expansion. He's talked about this forever, about the 400,000 to 500,000 people and the jobs it would create in the rural parts of the state. And the Republicans have talked forever about having some sort of premium. In this case, I think it's 2% of your household income. And they've also talked about a work provision. And the left comes back at that and says most of the people who would be cared for under this are already working. So it's really the same fight.
And I think they argue that the money spent to enforce the working provision is just far, you spend a big chunk of money to enforce it. Almost everyone is already working anyway, so they feel like it's just kind of a waste of time.
That's the Democrat
Yeah,
argument.
that's right.
Because Donnie Lambeth, who's a Winston-Salem Republican legislator, says this alternative, quote, might fit North Carolina's culture. Is he referring to the work requirement and this feeling that if you don't work, you don't get anything for free?
Well, he's referring to the Republican culture, what they want. That's what he's referring to in his base.
But so even this, which the House Republican Conference is would pass probably today if they took a vote on it, is still a non-starter in the state Senate. And so but they have proposed passing the budget and then taking a separate vote on Carolina Cares, and the House anyways has said, look, Governor Cooper, if you will sign the budget, we would be in favor of calling a special session, because remember, our lawmakers love special sessions. We'd be in favor of calling a special session to consider Medicaid expansion. Of course, that's a move without any guarantee of an end result.
Well, getting back to what Steve was talking about, this fact that the Democrats say that the work requirement and enforcing that work requirement it costs more than it's worth. This idea for Carolina Cares didn't just spring up out of whole cloth in the North Carolina legislature. This has been tried elsewhere. And is that what Democrats are saying? They have found elsewhere where they try to enforce this work requirement, it costs too much money?
Yeah, I think they point to Arkansas as a state that did this, and where there's been a lot of fights back and forth over
You want to do what Arkansas does?
Really? So, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I know he's not going to a station in Arkansas.
That's right. All right. Despite the Republicans' lack of a veto-proof majority, House Speaker Tim Moore sounds confident, or he sounded confident at least on Tuesday, that he could muster the votes to override. Has he discovered that's not the case, or is he still trying to wrangle the cats?
There's got to be a reason that the House hasn't voted on this yet.
Okay.
And that's because they don't have the votes. But it is interesting.
Ding, ding, ding.
We've seen some developments this week. We've seen some, well, first, Republican lawmakers have said, without really offering any proof, so take all of this for what it's worth, that they've heard of some Democrats who would be in favor of overriding the veto being threatened by Democrats associated with the governor, that they'll run a primary challenger against them. And then we saw some evidence of that. Progress NC, a liberal outside group, started running ads against at least one Democrat member of the House, Billy Richardson from Fayetteville, who has taken a lot of heat for being open to overriding the budget. They are running ads saying that he favors pork for his district over working North Carolinians. So this is already starting.
You know, pork is a word we used to talk a lot about in the 80s and 90s when we talked about politics, and it kind of disappeared from the vocabulary. Well, now it's back because in order to override the governor's veto, they have to get some Democrats to cross over, and the Democrats who are most likely to cross over are people who've gotten significant, what they call earmarks, as long as it's attached to a pig. Then that's what it is, for their districts. Is that correct?
That is correct. But Mike, once again, you sadden me. I come on this program and you engage in this kind of political skepticism that's just shocking and breathtaking that this would go on.
Thank you very much.
The old North State.
So there, some
They
of
need
these,
7 Democrats, by the way, in the House.
and some of them, I think 5 of them or 4 of them have significant earmarks.
Four of them voted for the budget in the House, voted for the budget initially when it passed.
Right.
And so they really only need to pick off 3 more for the override. Yeah. We know that Representative Richardson from Fayetteville is, so you really only need 2 more. And there are at least 2 more that have some pork that is, heading home to their districts. And this is important because the votes are already there in the Senate. Functionally, it's not really as close of a call in the Senate because of some procedural stuff and what have you. So really, if they can get the votes to override the veto in the House, they can get to it in the Senate. But at this point, who knows?
Last time I checked, Mecklenburg County needs a transit tunnel. So maybe we could get that out of the
Mike is
legislature.
now bartering political deals on air.
So unlike the federal government, the state does not shut down when a budget has not been achieved. So when might this resolve? Because things are going to keep going, so there's no real
The
Right.
conversations I've had with Republicans in Raleigh for months now is that they don't think we're going to pass a new budget. And so what happens is all of the state spending just continues at the levels from the last budget. Now, that has some impact on non-recurring appropriations. It also has an impact on all the things that are in the budget, the pay raise for state employees, the cost of living for retirees, the pay raises for teachers, any other thing that was new.
What else was in there? There was some affordable housing. There was some
affordable
coverage
housing
about that
yeah.
this week.
How might that be? Because evidently I read that puts some affordable housing construction projects in jeopardy. Why? Because they're not going to get the money in
Right.
time. So
They don't.
developers
Right,
move
exactly.
on.
Because non-recurring means they don't get it till the next
Right.
budget is officially
Right.
passed, so the money's not there.
Right. And so, this is why the State Employees Association of North Carolina has been out in strong support of the budget because it does good stuff for their members. And so the Republicans' argument, rightly or wrongly, is saying, look, North Carolinians, the governor wants to risk all of these other nice things that we've done because we won't do medical. Now, of course, they knew that he was going to do all this. So they put it all in the budget. So he wants to risk all of these other things because we won't give in to his one demand. And the governor says they're not taking care of work. They're putting all these other priorities over working families who need health care.
Okay. So meanwhile, while they're struggling with all that in Raleigh, on to the important stuff. We know that Panthers owner David Tepper wants a soccer team here, a Major League Soccer franchise in Charlotte. And this week, the former soccer executive that David Tepper hired to help make that happen, Panthers president Tom Glick, announced a 5-year deal for Charlotte to host the International Champions Cup. This is being touted from the rooftops. How big a deal? how big a deal is this?
Well, I mean, I think it is significant because the group that promotes these matches had not done a multi-year agreement with any of the cities. It goes to various cities each summer. And, of course, the bigger point that Katie and all of us were writing about this week is the fact that this is sort of another milestone for making the argument to pursue a Major League Soccer franchise. And Steve and I were talking before the show. It's really kind of funny. 2 years ago, there's all this hue and cry about trying to bring MLS to Charlotte. You have one of the league executives come to town, all this stuff, nothing happens. It dies. And now all of a sudden you have a guy that's got $12 billion in his pocket, and things start moving a lot faster.
And we'll continue to talk a little bit about what's moving, what we're moving toward, and what this 5-year deal means, what's coming over the next 5 years, et cetera, and what that will mean for our prospects of getting a Major League Soccer team. I would tell you that we have it already. It's done. It's in the bag. We just don't know it yet. Eric Spanberg is here from the Business Journal, Katie Peralta from The Observer, Nick Oxler from WBTV, and Steve Harrison from WFAE News. We'll continue in a moment. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and historic Brattonsville, presenting the Battle of Huck's Defeat, live music, cooking demonstrations, and children's militia drills this Saturday and Sunday. South Carolina is just right. Details at chmuseums.org. Well, as you may have noticed, the stock market is way up for the year. It had hit all-time highs yesterday. The economy seems to be booming. Interest rates are possibly on the way down. They're already pretty low. The annual GDP growth is hovering around 3% for the first quarter, and Charlotte's economy is also healthy, but But some economists and investors are worried because what goes up must eventually come down. So we're going to be joined by two business reporters and an economist to talk about all of this and more Monday at 9.
America celebrates the women who won the World Cup. Stocks surge after the Fed signals a probable rate cut, and the Labor Secretary defends a plea deal for a multimillionaire sex offender.
We believe that we proceeded appropriately.
The Friday News Roundup next time on 1A.
The News Roundup continues next hour following the Charlotte Talks local news roundup here on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup with Steve Harrison here from WFAE News, Katie Peralta from the Charlotte Observer, Nick Oxner from WBTV News, and Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal. So Tom Glick is the Panthers president, who was a former soccer executive, who David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, brought in to be the president of the Panthers, but also to help ease the way into this major league franchise in soccer that he liked. And this week, Tom Glick says that Charlotte is a soccer city, darn it, and that his announcement was proof of that.
We have a great case, a very strong case. We're looking forward to continuing to tell them the good news about soccer and our preparedness.
So was he saying these things to us or to Major League Soccer?
Yes. Pound, but other than that, the two of you said the same thing.
I can lend him one. So, Katie, you reported this week that Panthers COO Mark Hart told you that the most important thing the organization is working on is to clearly provide evidence that Bank of America Stadium is a tremendous soccer venue and that the community absolutely supports soccer. And he said this is now beyond talk. This is action. Expand.
Pretty strong words there from Chief Operating Officer Mark Hart. And I think what they're going to point to is some of the past success that they've had with some of these professional games that have come through Charlotte, like the Gold Cup games, the International Champions Cup games, et cetera, and the fact that they have put 55,000 plus people into the stands. I think the average MLS game averages something like what?
22,000 or right around.
Right. Yeah. So they're thinking like, you know, we're not going to build a soccer-specific stadium and we're not going to put 22,000 people in Bank of America Stadium. We're going to put 50,000.
Yeah, but if you have a regular season, isn't it likely that you would have less attendance than if you have a one-off event?
Sure, yeah.
And I think that there's also some skepticism to be had about Atlanta's team as well. They're the most successful attendance-wise, and I think they set some kind of crazy record when they played the Sounders this season, packing over 70,000 into their stadium. And of course, Mercedes-Benz is this beautiful new stadium. There's sort of this like newness allure to it, and of course. You know, those are two of the most popular teams in the MLS. So
I was going to just say in the MLS, I think, so their big thing is they want these small soccer-only stadiums. I think, so there's only two teams, right? We just talked about Atlanta. They play in a football stadium. In Seattle. And I think
New England.
Okay, everyone else, they built these small, intimate stadiums, and that was what we were told we had to have 2 years ago.
Well,
now, maybe not.
You reported, Katie, that Major League Soccer would require a stadium plan. Maybe that's what Steve is talking about. Among other things, well, Bank of America Stadium is a stadium. It has seats. It has a playing field, or the pitch, as they say. What else would a plan consist of?
So they've kind of hinted at what this, upgraded stadium look could be like. In the fan survey they sent out, I think earlier this spring or something, they've talked about, they gauged fans on stuff like creating a more intimate soccer feel. What exactly that means, I think, is sort of up to the imagination. I would imagine that they could, potentially take out some of the high-level seats. They could expand the...
They would do that and then put them back in for football?
No. I mean, a lot of the newer stadiums don't have 75,000 seats. I mean, 60,000 is, I think, what a lot of newer ones are looking like, and that's still a lot. So instead of having some of, the crappy bowl seats, you're looking at more premium, club suites, some field-level suites, because those ultimately are more lucrative for the team.
Well, both the league and the Panthers have said that to make these make these expectations realistic, they would have to do some stadium enhancements. And Eric, you reported that they're expecting to tell the MLS that they have 60 suite commitments for expansion of soccer. 60-suite commitments, meaning what?
So what they
People
did
have
was
already bought the tickets?
They went to companies who have already bought suites for Panther games, and they said, look, if we charge you $100,000 a year to come to soccer matches, would you pay that? And 60 companies have said yes. What's significant about that, of course, it's $6 million. That's what's significant. But also, most of your soccer-specific stadiums have 25 to 30 suites. So essentially, one of the arguments they're going to make is, look, yes, we're coming with an NFL stadium. We know that's not your preference, but we already have 60 suites. That's an example of the kind of revenue and crowds that we will be able to drive in this stadium. But I want to go back to when Katie's talking about, reconfiguring the stadium. Mm-hmm. You've already broken my heart with these notions of politicians swapping favors, perhaps in Raleigh. And I just wonder if these improvements at B of A Stadium would involve perhaps city government money at some point. I haven't heard that. Just a question.
Well, I'm going to come back to that in a second. I think you reported also, Eric, that Tom Glick is predicting season ticket sales in the range of 30,000 for a Charlotte team. What is the Atlanta season ticket sale like? Do we know?
They came in at 35. They're higher now, and they have a waiting list.
Because 30,000 season ticket sales would make this team among the nation's most popular clubs. Is he being overly optimistic, or is that reasonable to think we could do that?
I think, Steve, I think you mentioned it, both of you mentioned Atlanta. I agree that you have to be careful with the Atlanta example. For one thing, they're just an outlier in almost every aspect. This thing has taken off for, I think, a lot of reasons people haven't even figured out yet. But also, remember, Atlanta is twice the size of Charlotte's metro area, so they have a much bigger pool to draw from. So if the Panthers could sell 30,000 season tickets, I mean, that would be quite an achievement.
And that's not counting the individual ticket sales or like the group premium ticket sales that they could also add. I think he estimated another 50% to that number. So it's a pretty significant estimated number. Again, these are not like commitments.
I mean, if you cut it in half, Mike, then they're going to be fine business-wise. If they have 15,000 season tickets, they'll be fine.
So tagging on to what the other cynic in the room, Eric, said a second ago, Katie, about taxpayer money being involved in this, you reported something here that might be encouraging to some taxpayers. You said that at the NFL owners meeting in the spring, David Tepper said that upgrading the stadium would be more cost-efficient than building a new one. What? No new stadium? Is that an indication that he's pretty happy with the building and that all it needs is some lipstick?
I think short-term, yes. And whatever short-term means, I think is up for debate. Eric and I were in Pittsburgh when Mark Hart talked about the use of state, county, and city funds to gussy up a stadium and the area around it. Charlotte has historically had some issues with getting state funds for professional sports arenas. Remember back in...
Well, the budget's still in flux.
I'm sorry?
The budget is still in flux.
That's one thing they have going for them. I don't think that that's an ask right now. In fact, they won't commit to saying whether or not they have talked to state leaders, but I mean, Cooper was up front from day one being like, we want the Panthers to be here. We want, they're very good for the state and they're good for business, yada, yada.
Well, not only that, though, let's just say it's lipstick. It's going to be the best lipstick imaginable. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of lipstick, not just...
Yes, the city has budgeted, they've set aside $75 million starting that would be available, I think, in 2023. That's out of the tourism funds. I think, like Eric said, $75 million would be a good start.
And
that would be a down payment on...
Yeah.
So what are these 5 events, this 5-year deal that we're having to bringing these 5 games to Charlotte? What are they?
So we've already had these matches coming every year. We've had them 5 of the last 6 years. July 20th will be the 5th. And they're international teams, men's teams coming in and playing from England, from Germany, from Italy. And it's part of a tournament that is run by this group called Relevant Sports Group. What happened this week is that Charlotte and the Panthers essentially locked up a spot as a tournament site 4 or 5 years starting next year. So in the past, they've had to lobby and pursue these games, and now they know it will be coming back.
I don't know who wrote the article about the House of Soccer, but we're getting that this summer. I think it's July 19th and 20th with a fan fest at Romare Bearden Park, and I think I read that article 3 times, and I still don't understand what it is. What is it?
It's a fan fest.
It's a fan fest, and it's next week too. I think a lot of people pointed out, geez, that's a pretty short amount of time to put this thing together and to market it. They say that they're spending like over $1 million on this thing, so it's apparently a huge production. In the past, they've attracted like Drake and Odell Beckham Jr. and 2 Chainz and all these, huge celebrities. So it's apparently a really big deal in kind of bringing in different elements of pop culture, merging that with soccer in, some kind of interesting, sexy way. So it should be interesting to see how many people.
So is that event and the 5 things that we're going to host over the next 5 years, is this just a way to get Major League Soccer to look more seriously at us? And if so, what are they looking for? What will click with them to say, that's a soccer town, we want to be there?
Well, one of the things is what Katie mentioned is that you've had crowds of 55,000 and up for these first, I guess if we had 4 matches so far and the 5th one's to come. So that sort of got Charlotte on MLS's radar. And when the previous bid was underway in 2017, at first Charlotte looked like a really strong contender. I mean, I think MLS wanted to be here, and then the stadium discussion, which would have replaced Memorial Stadium, if you remember, and involved a lot of public money, that all came unraveled, and then Charlotte just kind of went off into oblivion.
And that was prior to David Tepper's arrival.
Correct. And then David Tepper comes in, and Katie, you were in Atlanta the day that owners approved him, and I remember he said that day, he made the remark, well, maybe it'd be MLS or something. Clearly, he was not just, throwing that off the cuff. And so he's had this plan all along to have MLS, and I think everybody is aware of the attributes on both sides. And I think that, as you said, Mike, before the break, it does feel inevitable. How soon, I don't know, but it seems like with the money and the stadium and all that, they're probably going to get an MLS team.
Okay, let's move on to something clearly more serious. There was another shooting this week at lunchtime at the South Boulevard Steak and Shake, which is near Pineville, where an employee was killed and the suspect and another person were left with life-threatening injuries. Nick, you were on the scene there shortly after the shooting. This was a robbery, but do we know what happened that caused shots to be fired?
I don't know that we've gotten a very detailed explanation. From what we do know, it sounds like a man walked into the Steak and Shake or went into the Steak and Shake with a gun as an attempt to do an armed robbery, and at least one employee fought back, and that employee ended up being shot and killed. We know a second person was also hit inside the Steak and Shake, and then police quickly responded. Both the Pineville Police Department and the CMPD were dispatched when they got the call about this. Pineville Police responded on scene first and ended up shooting the gunman.
The second suspect was arrested and charged in the slaying later this week after the shooting was well past. Kiara Monique Murphy, who allegedly dropped off Eddie Doe, who was the robber, the shooter, the initial suspect. What do we know about the two of them?
Well, there is a lot to know about Eddie Doe, the man who was shot by police as being the gunman. He has an extensive criminal history, I think 14 previous convictions. Most recently got out of prison in January, was released from prison after more than 7 years for having been convicted of accessory to murder from a 2011 murder. And so that he was still on active probation when this all happened earlier this week, or parole, when this happened earlier this week. It is not clear the extent to which he was actively being monitored by those who are charged to do so.
His criminal record includes assault, fraud, and attempted robbery. And CMPD Chief Kurt Putney, who has become increasingly agitated not only by the rising number of homicides, but what he believes are some of the things that have caused those numbers to rise, had said this week it's time to really double down on what it takes to hold people responsible who we know are committing violent offenses repeatedly.
It's time that we have to move beyond having people like Mr. Harris sacrifice his life because a repeat violent offender is not being held fully accountable.
The Mr. Harris that he refers to was Darnell Harris. He's the restaurant worker who put up a fight. He's been described as a hero. Why did he put up a fight? It's not his money. It's the restaurant's money. Seriously. Why did he do it? You know?
I think that would be why people are calling him a hero, including his coworkers at the restaurant. I mean, some people just leap into action. We saw this in the UNC Charlotte shooting as well, and their response isn't to hide, it's to challenge those people. So,
and also to underline Chief Putney's frustration with not holding people responsible, it should be noted that not only did Eddie Doe have a long rap sheet, he was allegedly involved in yet another robbery in the previous week, right, at East Coast Wings in Northlake. Has that been confirmed?
I don't know.
I don't know that
it has been. Well, let's go back, though, to Chief Putney's frustration. It would be interesting to hear his interaction. So he spoke to the city councilor this week with District Attorney Spencer Merriweather. He also spoke this week to the Mecklenburg County Criminal Justice Advisory Group, which is made up of judicial officials, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, and chiefs of police. He spoke to that group, and we sent a reporter to find out what he was going to say, but that reporter was kicked out of the meeting, even though it should have been a public meeting. And they said, you cannot be here, and they've offered no explanation why. So we know that there's an issue. We know that there are discussions about this issue, but some of those discussions have not been allowed to be open to the media, even when they should be.
Really?
And even though this is a very important
How
and
many?
interesting question. How many what?
Have not been open to the media.
Well, we don't know. We don't know because these aren't – this particular group, which is chartered by the county, should fall under the open meetings law, doesn't have on its website, doesn't have updated agendas. There's no meeting notification that's easily available. We found out about this one, sent a reporter, and they were told to leave.
What does this group do?
They tackle issues, just as the name suggests, this Justice Advisory Group, the name suggests, is a way for officials in the criminal justice system in Mecklenburg County to get together and talk about.
But don't they need, just in their defense, let me play devil's advocate,
Sure.
Don't they need some private time to talk about, to kick ideas around that just float things and knock them down, that they're never going to come to fruition?
That's not how this works in North Carolina. We have the open meetings law, and the open meetings law gives a very specific set of criteria as to when you can adjourn into a closed session. They contended that the meeting that our reporter was kicked out of this week, that it was an executive committee meeting. However, there's no provision in the state open meetings law to have an executive committee meeting, and even if you do go into closed session, you need to properly advertise it and properly do it. They didn't do that. And this is the public's business, Mike. At the end of the day, we have a very important issue of violent crime in this community. We have a police chief who's saying things and making accusations about the mishandling of violent crime and violent criminals in the court system, and we have a meeting where the police chief was talking to court officials and senior court leaders, and the public wasn't made aware of the meeting, and when the media tried to go, they were kicked out. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, the chief really did kind of throw a hand grenade about this issue 2 weeks ago in that news conference where he just really ripped the whole idea of not the whole idea of electronic monitoring. He says he supports electronic monitoring. He just says it's being misused. And so he kind of really threw this out there, and then he spoke to city council on Monday night. I'm not saying he walked it back. He did not, but he was much more, I think we have common ground with the chief magistrate. And so it kind of like what Nick said, it leaves us wondering, like, well, where is this issue? Because they did have a meeting, the chief and the chief magistrate. He said, well, we have some agreement, but right, we're kind of wondering, like, so is anything happening?
He's also a little upset with the revised bail program that Spencer Merriweather and others have put into place to get poor people out of jail while they await trial. Chief Putney will be on this program next Tuesday. We'll talk about this and more. We'll talk more about this, in fact, coming up right after the break at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members at Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to Mazda's focus to ensure every element of a car is designed around the driver. More at MazdaofSouthCharlotte.com. Labor Secretary Alex Acosta defends himself after revelations from his days as a federal prosecutor in Florida about a sweetheart plea deal for an accused sex trafficking multimillionaire who's now facing new charges and new accusers. Nationwide, ICE raids are set for this weekend. One Democrat exits the 2020 race, another steps in, and the U.S. celebrates its Women's World Cup victory. Just some of the stories they'll be talking about as the News Roundup continues on 1A in 20 minutes with a national and international slant. Joshua Johnson and his panel of journalists will be there then. We're here now, and we're coming right back.
It's your world. We help you explore it.
What do Hong Kong's protesters do next? The latest demonstrations turned violent in the territory at the edge of China.
It's your community. We help you understand it.
The debate over placing a quarter-cent sales tax increase on the ballot wasn't just about the arts.
WFAE's Morning Edition is an essential way to start your day and stay connected to your world. Listen weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup, and that is why Steve Harrison is here from WFAE News, Eric Spanberg from the Business Journal, the Charlotte Business Journal, Katie Peralta from the Observer, and Nick Oxner from WBTV News. We've been talking about Chief Putney's displeasure with some of the electronic monitoring, how it's being used, although CMPD monitors it, and also with the move toward being a little more reasonable with bail, especially for poor people, because it impacts them more than it does rich people. And for the second time in 3 weeks, Chief Putney addressed City Council on the issue of the city's rising homicide rate this week, telling them that the call is for people to step up and assist. He's also complained about people not coming forward when he knows they know who did something. He also called this a community health issue, and at that same meeting, District Attorney Spencer Merriweather was there, underlining the importance of talking to young people about handling conflict, because most of these homicides are being committed by people under the age of 25. We'll be holding a public conversation on this in a couple of weeks on this very topic about how officials are dealing with this. How did the City Council respond to these two folks?
I mean, they were, I think they were pretty measured. They didn't, they really support the chief, so they aren't going to, it's just not really their style to really, I've never seen them press this chief or any previous chief on why is crime up, why are homicides up. So they were just kind of asked a lot of open-ended questions, really in support of what he's doing.
So I think it was you who said that when Chief Putney spoke, he said that there was common ground to be found in how they're using this electronic monitoring. Was he more specific?
He wasn't, and I asked him and said, so what was that? Kind of what did you guys talk about? What came out of this meeting? And he wouldn't really go there, and said that we're going to be meeting again later this week, which is what Nick referred to. That was not public. So it's a bit of a mystery in terms of what, if any, changes may be made to the bail policy or electronic monitoring moving forward.
I think one of the things that's just interesting about what we're talking about here is, remember, there's 61 murders, I believe, year to date. Mm-hmm. There were 58 all of 2018. We're talking about these public meetings. We're talking about the chief being frustrated. And yet, while we are going through open filing and getting into a mayor's race and council races, people are paying lip service to public safety, but it doesn't seem to be an overwhelming political issue as you would think it would be when you're already surpassing your year-long numbers midway through 2019. I just find that really odd.
It is playing a role, a tiny, tiny, tiny role,
right,
in the mayor's race, which we'll talk about in a second here. Because not only is homicide up, but serious crime, other forms of violent crime like rape, aggravated assault, and robbery are also up over last year. Do we know? Does anybody have an understanding of why?
Nobody really has an answer other than, we've talked about it, and I think you just mentioned it again, with the homicides, so much of it is people get in an argument and quickly resort to shooting each other. But yeah, violent crime up 18.5% in the second quarter of 2019 versus the previous year.
Chief Putney has long said that we are under-policed for a city this size, and now the district attorney, Spencer Merriweather, is saying that the courts need more personnel, that the criminal justice system in Charlotte is inadequate, he says. He needs about 32 more prosecutors. We have 83. Mm-hmm. He needs 115. But he says that's not the only thing we're short of. We're short of judges. Really?
Yeah, and so he said, and the point he was making, and I'll let you pick this up, Nick, is that even if he got the 32 ADAs tomorrow, it wouldn't make that much difference because there's a courtroom logjam.
That's absolutely correct. And this is not a problem unique to Charlotte, although Charlotte feels it more because we're bigger. There is a shortage of all court staff across the entire state, of prosecutors, of judges. And why that matters is because court is intentionally slow, right? Because we want everyone to get their fair hearing. But that requires a person in a black robe sitting there to hear it. And you can only go as fast as there are people to sit in a black robe. And so if you don't, so every person that has to wait to be heard, right? It's not fair to the defendant because in this system we have a right to a speedy trial. And it also isn't fair to the victims of those crimes who have to sit and wait with their the person that they've accused of committing a crime against them being potentially out on bond or out on ankle monitoring. And so it increases your pool of people who are in the population who may have committed a crime, and it also infringes on people accused of crimes' rights.
Well, we all know how fast the population here has grown and how much it has grown, and yet Spencer Merriweather says we have the same number of judges today that we had 25 or 30 years ago.
And there seems to be no appetite or recognition in Raleigh that there needs to be a significant increase in funding for our court system. The court system is run by the North Carolina Administrative Offices of the Courts. Their budget has actually seen some cuts over the last few years. It continues to be a punching bag for Republicans in Raleigh who want to score political points against judges that they don't like, and they want to try to get majorities on courts by changing party affiliations and redistricting. I mean, these are just things that have happened over the last few years. But no one seems to be looking at the court system saying, boy, we've got a problem in places like Charlotte, but also Greensboro, Raleigh, other places around the state. And it's not just criminal court, it's also civil court as well.
Okay, well, stay tuned. More to come on that issue over the next several thousand years. Okay. Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles paid a visit to the Elections Board this week to file papers to run for a second term, but not before she touted some successes in her first term.
The citizens of Charlotte elected me 2 years ago, and I'm really grateful for that. And while I'm registering to run for mayor, I know that every success that I've had in this city, it's been because of the people that live here. The people that voted 69% to approve $50 million for affordable housing bonds. The people that actually showed up and said, we're going to work on the issues that are very important. When we convene people together, that's what makes our city great. And so that's why today I'm so grateful to once again ask the citizens of this community to support me for my second term for re-election as mayor of this great city.
You got it.
Yes.
She spent some more time talking about the progress made toward increasing the amount of affordable housing and her proposition that we cannot forget those at the bottom of the economic scale.
I truly believe that Charlotte can be the best city in this country if we continue to work on the issues that are important on the grassroots neighborhood level, because the least of us have to be able to succeed for all of us to be successful.
So if she wins, she would be the first Charlotte mayor since Anthony Fox to have a second term. She has no Republican challenger at the moment and is likely not to have one, but she does have a Democratic challenger, 20-year-old Joel Odom, who said that we know the person with the most endorsements doesn't always win. And he said he's running because of seeing so many young people dying on the streets in these shootings. He says what they need is hope, and he can give them that hope. Has he said how?
I have not heard him say how yet. I mean, he is obviously a very new face.
Yeah, he's 20 years old. He'll be 21 just in time to be mayor. If
And the mayor does have an official Republican challenger, David Michael
really?
Rice, who is a longtime fringe candidate who often runs. So not a serious candidate, but by having his name as a Republican on the ballot, he will probably get 25 or 30% in November.
Really?
I mean, in the past, that's what he's received. I mean, there's just a lot of people on both sides who go into the booth and, I'm not going to vote for the Democrat, I'm not going to vote for the Republican check.
Yeah.
So,
Well, some people in the community are not happy with Vi Lyles, particularly over these shootings, and they have alleged that she has spent too much time courting the Republican National Convention and not enough time on issues in the community, meaning the African American community. Could this Joel Odom candidacy be the answer to that for those folks?
I mean, it feels like a really, really, really long shot. I think that was 3 reallys. So. But I would say, going back to when we were talking about just the overall issue of public safety, I continue to be a little bit dumbfounded that this is not a bigger issue. And maybe it will become a larger one now that we're hearing so much from the police chief, the district attorney, and others. Maybe that becomes a bigger part of the city elections. But it's been fairly muted, I think.
And I think you could see the reason why there is no serious Republican challenger to Vi Lyles. She's very popular, very strong. But what about the city council at large seats? That's a race where a serious Republican candidate could make this case that Eric talked about. Like, we really need to shift our focus. Crime is increasing. That's a real issue. You could get traction on it.
Yeah. Although the problem is, you look at John Powell, Republican, who ran at large for the last 2 elections, very serious candidate, very credible, very strong candidate, put forth a good showing, but fell just short not once but twice. And so if you're a Republican in this town, you're thinking, I mean, you're right, there's stuff to run on. Yeah. But politically, the political dynamics there make it very difficult.
Lyles has also curried a lot of Republican favor in recent years.
She's the most popular Republican in North Carolina.
Especially among the business crowd, too, and I think that'll take her a long way.
Yeah. So no Republican has stepped forward in the at-large races. Was that what you're saying?
That's right. And there's this, I think it was on either Facebook or Twitter, where Tariq Bakari, he's the Republican city council member in South Charlotte, put out this kind of plea, I know there's a Republican considering running. Let's all give this post a lot of likes to encourage them to do it. And that's kind of the state of the Republican Party in Charlotte today. Yeah. It's this social media plea to run.
Well, there was a story this week, and I know you don't want to talk about this, but I want to talk about it, about facial recognition software showing up at the and you really don't want to talk about that.
Perks of being a host, isn't it?
That's right. It's a perk, yes. Anyway, it's coming to the airport. Get ready for the Matrix, or is it Blade Runner? I'm not sure. This is being used in 17 other airports, and evidently you walk up, if you're on an international flight, you walk up to this device, it's a camera, and it takes your picture, and then instantly a supercomputer compares it to the picture on your passport and says who you are. That sounds reasonable on the one hand. On the other hand, the ACLU says that when you aggregate this data, and we don't know where this data is going, it becomes a mass surveillance tracking device that could change the nature of society. You don't want to talk about it, but shouldn't we be concerned about this? I mean, not that there's ever been any government abuse.
Well, look, I don't know that this is a new thing, and we're going to be grappling, I think, with issues like these more as we move on, and artificial intelligence gets better and more advanced, but it's upon us, and it's already been upon us, whether we knew it or not. Right. And maybe the change here is that we're just starting to hear about it more and consider these things.
It's in everything, too. I mean, you swipe your VIC card, they know what your preferences are, they know what your home zip code is.
It's in your phone.
Yes. They know everything. So I think that if we should have been terrified about how much, quote unquote, they know about us.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
I mean, I think it's just, as you're saying, Mike, it's another part of the evolution of these companies having more and more information about all of us.
There were reports this week that Homeland Security, I believe, has a massive database of everyone's driver's license pictures. I mean,
having artificial intelligence, by the way, is another perk of being the host. Okay.
Where?
I said artificial.
Genuine artificial, we want to see it.
Okay, Lowe's is set to receive about $72 million in incentives for locating their global technology hub in South End. It will be in a 23-story tower. It'll be the highest building, at least for the moment, in South End that is scheduled to open in 2021. It's been touted as a significant deal, not because of the incentives, but because of what it will ultimately mean to the city of Charlotte as a technology center. How will this change the technology sector in Charlotte?
I want to credit Eric because you also reported first on the city and county incentives, so good on you guys. But
Thank you.
Also wanted to say that they have been talking about building up their technology team, I guess, for a really long time. And when they announced this latest initiative about, building this global tech hub, CEO Marvin Ellis had said something along the lines of, we want to sort of be like the first of many tech companies to sort of grow this tech environment in Charlotte. And 2,000 is a very big number. And so that's going to be 1,600 new hires and about 400 existing like software engineers, AI specialists, things like that, moving down from Mooresville.
Many of these jobs paying six figures.
Yes.
Right.
And they also, Ellison and other executives there have said, we want to be in like a cool, millennial friendly environment, a place where people can train to work, walk to restaurants in that South End.
So you cram 2,000 people into a 23-story building, and there'll probably be more.
Cram is such a nasty word.
There'll be more than 2,000 people in that building, because it'll be more than just Lowe's. So, and you just alluded before we started the show today, Eric, that this is just the first of many projects like that coming to South End. Where will all the cars go?
Well, and you have actually the first, I guess, would be the Dimension Fund Advisors Building, which Katie helped me. Is that 8 stories, 10 stories? I can't remember.
Yeah,
but it's sizable. That sort of started the inevitable expansion of what we're seeing with this 23 stories. That's a great question, Mike. Everybody can't ride the train, though I know cats would like them to. So, yeah, it's going to be very congested.
I'm not going to be able to drive down South Boulevard from my house anymore. But
that's true.
Barely can as it is.
Particularly when you get in those other streets, the Camdens and those streets. I mean, it's just going to be a mess.
It's unbelievable. And have they considered that? Did the city fathers and
Mike, that'd be a
mothers
good question for Mike and the mayor.
I think, all right. Thank
Promo.
you. I can always use more questions. And evidently, we're very concerned in the city about the environment, but you just said before we started, Steve, that a lot of the environmental officials are bailing. They're leaving. Why?
Just kind of a recap. Back at the end of last year, the City Council passed the Strategic Energy Action Plan to slash carbon emissions in the city by 2030. Everyone was excited about that. And since then, you had the Environment Committee. The mayor disbanded it. And now the 3 top officials who are really in charge of putting this together, they are all leaving the city. And a lot of people are wondering, what is the fate of this plan?
All right. Well, that's another topic for another day, isn't it? That's Steve Harrison from WFAE News. Nick Oxner was here from WBTV News. Katie Peralta from the Charlotte Observer, and Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal. Thank you all for the hour.